I am alive, and it's good to be alive, and today we're checking out everybody's favorite penis head-shaped Warframe, Limbo! No, but like, seriously, every helmet he has that isn't 10 gen looks like a phallic. Anyways, Limbo is an interesting frame to say the least. You obtain him via the Limbo Theorem quest, and that is the only way to get him. So if you get him, I highly recommend that you not sell him, or you will deeply, deeply regret it later. I will say that after Limbo's recent rework that he got, I'm really split on him. There's a lot of things I like about him and a lot of things I don't like about him. I don't think he'll ever be one of my absolute favorite frames for that reason, but he's definitely not useless, so I'll jump into a mission and show you guys what he's all about. Alright, so I do have to give Limbo props for being a very unique frame. This is really nice because it switches up gameplay and how Warframe feels when you're using him, and I think that's a very successful thing for the developers to do, is to make a frame that feels just completely unique. It's not like, oh, he's another tank frame, he's just, use his second and third power. It's like he totally feels like his own Warframe, which is really cool. So his passive is really cool. If you hit the somersault button, he actually enters the rift. This is pretty overpowered in and of itself. You are essentially unkillable and cannot be hurt, which is really nice. And you can be in here as long as you want, given that you don't enter a nullifier bubble. The only downside is you cannot injure enemies unless they are in the same rift plane as you. So they are in their own reality, which I am now in with them. But at any given moment, I can enter the rift by somersaulting, and you will see I will leave a rift trace there where my allies can also enter the rift, should they so choose. While you are in the rift, you generate energy, and so do your allies. So this is really cool because this will allow you to just kind of chill out, play it safe, and generate some energy so you can cast some of your powers. Its first power banishes enemies in a wave into the rift, which, my god, these enemies are so low level that it's just killing them. What's cool about this power is that upon casting it, it actually sends enemies to the rift, which is your alternate dimension, so those enemies cannot attack teammates or me as long as I am in reality, but once I switch dimensions like so, you can then attack them. You have to be really careful with Limbo, because depending on what enemies are or aren't in the rift, if you're not careful with how you manage it, and you actually need to enter the rift for safety, you might enter the rift along with some dangerous enemies, and they're going to be able to shoot you anyways. So I highly recommend you pay attention to who you're sending to the rift. What I don't like about this power is you cannot send enemies to the rift while you are in the rift. Granted, that is absolutely needed and necessary, to be honest, because if you could send enemies to the rift while you're in it, you would be a god. You would be unkillable, because when you banish enemies, as you can see, if it doesn't kill them, it actually stuns them and sends them to the ground, doing a knockdown. You would honestly be able to just stay in the rift all day, be invincible, and kill absolutely anything you need to. Your ultimate ability is called Cataclysm, which creates this gigantic sphere of swirling energy that gradually gets smaller over time. The reason I'm showing you his ultimate first before his second is because his second power actually freezes enemies that are in your rift. And all projectiles actually on top of that. So as you can see here, if I shoot, my projectile stays suspended until I deactivate the suspension and the bullets go flying in whatever direction I shot them. So I will test on this guy here. I will freeze him, launch a bunch of bullets in his good happy face. Not for long though, right? Unfreeze time, and voila, he is insta-fucked. So what's cool about Cataclysm is that it deals damage upon enemies entering it, meaning naturally if you use it against really low level enemies like I am right now, it basically acts as a nuke, and then it also deals damage again when you deactivate it. And another cool thing about when you freeze enemies inside the rift, if enemies are at the barrier of the rift, essentially the second they touch it, they take damage, because they take damage every time they enter the rift. So as you can see, these guys are killing themselves because what they're doing is they're touching the rift, taking damage and getting frozen, and then when the rift shrinks, they can move again. So they walk into the rift again and take damage, and walk into the rift again and take damage. So if enemies are outside the ability when you use this, it is really nice for dealing damage over time as a nice added effect. Also, your second power that freezes the rift remains active even if no enemies are in the rift, so you can have the ability prematurely activated, and then you can use Cataclysm and everyone is already instantly frozen. So I will show you this to its full effect here by taking out multiple enemies and unfreezing time. And there you go, it works like so. I'm going to show you guys what I don't like about Cataclysm and freezing enemies in the rift. So, you'll notice that if enemies are frozen in the rift here, much like my projectiles, and I shoot a bunch of projectiles at an enemy, I like to deactivate my Cataclysm every now and then, so watch this. When I deactivate my Cataclysm, enemies that were in it are no longer in Cataclysm because they're not in my big rift bubble. They are now in reality, but your bullets stay in the rift, and that really bothers me. It would be nice if deactivating my Cataclysm also just made my projectiles behave as normally again and shoot everybody. The reason I would enjoy that much more is because right now, as it stands, I have to constantly activate and deactivate my X button to shoot enemies, and I also have to constantly activate and deactivate my Y button to deal an extra burst of damage by detonating it early. I like to leave my X button, or for me the second power where you freeze enemies in the rift, I like to leave that active because then when I use Cataclysm, enemies are instantly frozen. So I usually just use my second ability over and over again and just constantly keep it on so that when I need to throw enemies into the rift, they're already frozen. That's why it bothers me that I have to activate my second and my ultimate over and over again. And last but not least, your third power, Rift Surge, causes enemies to have this little swirling energy effect around them. I don't really enjoy this ability as much as before the rework. So essentially what that does is, if an enemy with Rift Surge exits the rift, they will deal a radial blind and also spread their effect to nearby enemies, tossing them into the rift. The reason I do not like this ability is because when you deactivate it, it'll send enemies that weren't in the rift into the rift, and this is where it can get confusing if you're doing a really high level mission. There's going to be enemies constantly in your rift and out of it if you're using that ability all the time. So it's going to make it really hard to avoid damage as easily as you normally would. But aside from all of Limbo's shortcomings, honestly, he really is a cool frame. He's great for survival because when you're in the rift, you can revive allies, and on top of that, you can absolutely freeze everybody, which makes it just a great melee battle dome, really, if you think about it. Because when enemies are in here, your bullets are frozen, but your melee is not, so you can just run around and basically kill everyone while they're stasis. This is incredibly helpful for drawing fire off of your team. Your teammates might get a little annoyed at you if they're using a gun, but aside from that, most people I've been playing with don't really mind me using it in this manner because unlike earlier, before they reworked him, you can actually pick up items inside the rift as long as it is a rift dome. If you just enter the rift like this, you can't pick up items if it's just you that's in the rift. Both you and the item you're trying to pick up has to be inside of the rift. Cataclysm damage, which is his giant bubble here, deals damage proportionate of a percentage of enemies' health and shields. I don't really care much for this effect. It is nice, but in practice, when I'm using it against the Grenier, I don't know if it's because they have armor or what, but I have 125% power strength because naturally, my god, look at my power range and duration. I did not want to sacrifice those for power strength. So I still have positive power strength, and it still deals less than ideal damage. Even against level 80 enemies, my Rift easily only deals a couple hundred damage, which is really depressing given that it's a plus effect. So you guys may want to try a different build than me, but I have 128% duration, 130% efficiency, 235% range, and 125% power strength. So I have primed continuity over extended, intensify, stretch, streamline, vitality, Thief's Wit because I was using them to hunt for mods, and let's be honest, there's nothing else I can really fit for 7 mod capacity that's even worth the time, and Transient Fortitude. I have an Energy Siphon because if you stack that with the fact that you passively gain energy, 2 energy a second while you're in the rift, plus this, plus I'm Zanuric, which is 4 energy per second, I'm getting almost 10 energy per second in the rift, which allows me to use Cataclysm pretty much as I want. Unfortunately, I really don't like Limbo against the Corpus because if you're doing anything that's high level or worthwhile against the Corpus, they're going to have a shit ton of nullifiers, and when the nullifier bubble so much as touches the edge of your Cataclysm, it instantly deactivates the ability. So you have to jump out of your void in order to shoot the nullifier bubble for your powers to even be effective, and that just makes you really vulnerable since Limbo doesn't really actually have tankiness to him aside from, you know, running away to the rift when he gets in trouble. So I really don't like that about him. Nullifiers are like extra effective against Limbo, but you can be in the rift until you walk up to the edge of their bubble, run in there, melee kill them real quick, and jump back in if you're lucky. So he's really cool, definitely better than he used to be since his rework. Sorry it took me so long to get a review video on him. I didn't care much for Limbo, and the fact that I hated him so much before his rework, I was hesitant to try it. And to be honest, he's a frame that I find myself really having to juggle his powers on and off constantly throughout an entire mission. It kind of puts me off from playing him because he is cool, really. The concept of Limbo, he's neat, he's fun, he's interesting to play as, but he's a lot of work. This is just my personal opinion. He doesn't really fit my playstyle. He's a lot of work. I hate having to constantly deactivate and activate his powers at random different times given the situation. He's definitely cool to play as because it feels like you're playing its own minigame, but I don't know, frames like Mesa, who are just so much more simple. It's like buffs damage, jams enemy guns, increases damage resistance. Or Chroma, who's just a straight up tank. Banshee, who's just a straight up badass damage dealer. Limbo's just a really complex frame. He takes a lot more work to be efficient than most other frames. That's my opinion of it anyways. But hey, you know what? I hope this video was helpful. If you guys have any questions or comments, drop one down below, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out!